Thank you very much. Appreciate the introduction. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon, good evening, I suppose even good morning is possible. It is a global event. Yes, we're here today to talk about rethinking citizen development. So if you have questions, by all means, pose them. I probably will not look at them until near the very, very end, but I absolutely positively want to know. But in fact, if Rocky can read them perhaps near the end, that would be really, really handy. All right, let's get started. A couple of things are worth noting, not the least of which is, look, this is closely affiliated with the Microsoft 365 Collaboration Conference. That is going to happen in March of this coming year at the MGM Grand Resort in Las Vegas, Nevada. If you go to m365conf.com or monitor Twitter with the hashtag M365Conf, you will find out more information about this event. It's no longer just about SharePoint, it's about Teams, SharePoint, and the Power Platform. Definitely worth a look. All right. Thanks to all of our very generous sponsors. This event could not take place without them, and there are a lot. And I'm sure I'm not the only person today and tomorrow that is singing their praises. I won't be the last. Every single one of them deserves kudos and attention. Let's introduce myself. These are obligatory Who Am I slides. We're going to blast through this quickly because this is not about me. This is about the content. But my name is Mike Fitzmaurice. That's how you spell it, and you pronounce it that way. And my preferred pronouns are he and him. I kind of look like this. I'm not doing video and I'm not showing my photo right now because I gave myself a really, really, really short haircut several weeks back and I still look a little funny. Not bad, but I don't look like me. Don't want that on a permanent record anywhere in case this is being recorded. I am the chief evangelist and vice president in North America for WebCon. We are workflow and business process automation people and have been a Microsoft partner for 14 years. I am the original SharePoint evangelist. Long time ago, 20 years or more. It was my job to knock on doors and get IT professionals and developer types to pay attention to this thing that would eventually be called SharePoint. My involvement with the platform predates the name even. It's been a fantastic gig, but yeah, SharePoint's been around longer than you might think, and I've been a part of that. And before that, I was doing application development work with Exchange. I've been at this a while, is what I'm saying. These are not idle thoughts that I'm sharing with you. I am particularly familiar with business process and workflow automation and application integration, and I do a lot of work in the world of low code, no code, and citizen development. I hail from southwestern Ontario in Canada, although these days, and for some time now, I've been living in Seattle. And that's enough about me. Let's move on. There are some ground rules to this. This is a think piece. It is not what I would call a demo intensive tutorial session. Think of this as kind of a TED Talk, although I probably have more bullets than are present on a typical TED Talk. It's still a fairly minimalist deck. I want you to listen to me more than read the slides while I'm talking. But nevertheless, it's that kind of vibe. This is not a session about how to use tools or platforms. Plenty of people are doing that, and they're doing great work, and you should check them out. What I am going to focus on is how to think as you choose tools and platforms and as you use those tools and platforms, because there are good ways and bad ways to get all up in this stuff. Let's begin, because the session is called Rethinking Citizen Development. So let's begin with what is citizen development. I'm going to do a quick spoiler alert. This is not the same thing as low-code development. Too many people equate these terms. They shouldn't be. I will get into that, but wanted to get that out of the way very, very, very quickly. There's overlap, there's correlation, but it's not the same thing. And in fact, that's part of the problem. Citizen development is an answer to a problem that has been around for decades and isn't unique to computers or software or application design or look, this is a universal kind of thing. There are two problems that go hand in hand, and the first one is an application backlog. People want more things than can possibly be built in the amount of time available with the resources available. And you can either lower expectations, this is the default, you don't lower desire, but you lower expectations, or you increase the resources, not always possible, or you increase the number of people, or you delay the deadline. There are lots of ways to get this done, but there's an application backlog. And typically it's either lower the deadline or lower the expectations. But there is an application backlog, and we'd like to get more done and get it more done quickly. And maybe increasing the resources can help with that by finding surprise resources in surprise places. There's also this notion of a disconnect between stakeholders and developers. In other words, when stuff did get built, it was bad, or at the very least, it didn't fit very well. There's an old adage about I ask you to build something for me, you build it, and then my reaction is, if I'm feeling honest, well, it's just what I asked for, but it's not what I want. This happens all too often, and this is another motivation behind why people have advocated, including myself, have advocated citizen development for years. There are a number of solutions that have been proposed to address this. In fact, all of them have been put into practice over the years. Option number one has been something called rapid application development, which is essentially a change in the tools available to application developers to help them build stuff more quickly. And we don't change anything about the way they build anything. We don't change who's doing anything, but we come up with tools that write stuff faster or help them build things faster. That would be option number one, and it has been tried and it works to a certain extent, but only to a certain extent. And then instead of changing the tools, or in addition to it, change the process. Agile methodologies have been employed, and this involves breaking projects up, essentially making them ongoing and having regular iterations and regular releases, and a culture of constantly queuing up and reviewing and reprioritizing what should happen next, and essentially just get people used to the fact that an application is going to be released in little fits and starts over a long period of time. This is not a bad thing either. In fact, this is pretty much how modern software, especially cloud software, continues to be developed. It's not a bad thing. It just has its limits. Do this and nothing else, and it won't be enough. It isn't enough. So there is a third thing that can be done to this, which is to change the people. And that would be citizen developers. Don't just change what tools you're using. Don't just change the methodology you use. Instead of Agile, by the way, contrast that with the waterfall method, which is we start with a set of requirements, and then that goes over the waterfall, and then someone picks it up and does some things, and then it goes further along, and eventually weeks, months, years later, out comes the splash of a ready-to-use application. That's not that usually results in it's just what I asked for, but it's not what I wanted, or it might not even be what you asked for because weird things can happen. So Agile is a way to keep things in better sync and to get people used to well, adapting on the fly a lot. Citizen developers is a change in who's doing the application building. And again, this is a relatively new development. It's not new in terms of we know people that have been doing this for a long time, but the term itself is roughly 10 years old at this point. And when we talk about the citizen developer, this is where it comes from, in case you haven't heard, because, citizen is an odd term to be using here. It turns out to be better than one might think, but it came out of the notion of citizen soldier. The citizen soldier is a concept that's been around for centuries. The Roman Empire had citizen soldiers. Napoleon had citizen soldiers. Switzerland actually depends on every citizen having spent some time in the military and bringing a gun home and being ready to use it if necessary. There is a Swiss Army. They've got those knives and everything, but at the same time, they can draw on a much larger group of people that are not professional soldiers. They're citizens with soldiering skills. So keeping that concept in mind, we apply that to people who are not developers. They're regular people peppered throughout, instead of society, they're peppered throughout an organization, but they can do some development when it's necessary. In fact, if you want a somewhat formal definition, let's use this: a non-professional user who creates applications for localized use. That usually means that low-code, no-code tools or low-code, no-code development is going to be involved, but it is not the same thing. I'll show you what I mean by this. Citizen development is a part of the wonderful world of low-code, no-code development. It's not a perfect subset. There's some overlap there. This is a crude Venn diagram, but two things should be taken out of this. One, that little bump right here, where there's some citizen development taking place outside the realm of low-code, no-code development, that would be what, for lack of a better term, scripting, or a handful of people. How about this? If you're writing an Azure function, you're in that little crescent. Or again, if you're writing PowerShell scripts to automate some things, that's code. Okay, you're in code land. You're still doing probably ad hoc work that's not part of your primary job, or it's just a small part of it. So I'm going to call it citizen development, but it's definitely not low code, no code. I'm actually more interested in this bit out here, because this is low code, no code development being done by professionals. And if you look at the total number of people that use low code, no code development tools, most of them could write code if they wanted to, and in fact do write code part of the time, but they get more done using low code, no code tools. So the notion of citizen development being low code development is misleading. A lot of low code stuff is not ready for mere mortals or citizens to deal with. Doesn't mean it's not doing good. It's just let's not kid ourselves. In fact, there are things in Power Apps and Power Automate, or lots of different tools from lots of different companies that are outside of the scope of comfort, let alone safety, to have citizens, shall we say, work with them, but they still do a lot of good in the hands of people that know what they're doing. So it's not the same thing. Now, citizen development is, like I said, has been around for about 10 years, at least as a term. And a lot of people have put it into practice. And what was the result? Well, two basic things happened when you decided to arm people with low-code, no-code tools, and you encourage short dev cycles, and you said, well, anyone who can pick up a low-code tool is welcome to be a citizen developer in my book. Let's try it out. Who's it going to hurt? Well, two things happened. A lot more applications got built. This is actually potentially a pretty good thing. Remember, we had an application backlog. So did it break through? Depends on the applications. So a lot of applications that were in that backlog did get built by citizen developers. Things that they'd been waiting for years, and IT was never going to get to because they weren't large enough in scope or mission critical enough, but still mattered a lot to the individuals that wanted them. A lot of those got built. I would actually say that's a good thing. That said, a lot of time got diverted, displaced. And you could look at this a couple of different ways. You could view this as lost time the citizen in question would have devoted to their real primary job that they instead spent building a solution for themselves. You could also view this as time diverted on the part of professionals to clean up messes. It could also be time diverted because the application was good and worked and saved time. But yes, where people were spending their time changed a lot. It wasn't always a bad thing. Occasionally, it was actually a very, very good thing. But yes, more often than not, it was a lot like you attempting a home repair or a home improvement project. And after a while, you needed a regulation professional contractor to finish the job or fix some of your mistakes. That story happened a lot. Sometimes it was extremely successful. It was a mixed bag. Now, were organizations happy with this? Uh, again, look, I basically described what happened. I want to know whether or not net it was a good thing. And mercifully enough, we don't have to look very far to get the answer to this. Um, this survey was done by the CME Corporation. They did this in late 2018, so it's less than 2 years old, year and a half old. And it was a survey of organizations that had taken part in citizen development efforts. 54% of all projects, citizen development projects, were deemed a failure within their first year. 28% had what would be called marginal results. In other words, yeah, they might have done some good, but they certainly weren't game changers or anything to that effect. Fewer than 20% were regarded as a clear success. Now, this is all projects. Some organizations would have several projects, some had only one, et cetera, et cetera. But yeah, of all projects undertaken, fewer than 1 in 5 were considered successful. Remember, we've had low-code, no-code tools from various companies for quite some time. There's something about citizen development as an initiative that means, yeah, look, when it works, but more often than not, it does not. So let's take this apart a little bit and talk a little bit about what happened when it failed. Thing number one, a lack of expertise. Yeah, if there's a lack of expertise, there can be a lack of happy outcomes. Uh, I don't, if someone doesn't have expertise performing plastic surgery, I don't want them necessarily to remove a mole from my neck. If someone doesn't have expertise in the law, I don't necessarily want them writing my will. Look, I get this, but lack of expertise has nuance associated with it, and we should take this apart a little bit. The first type of expertise that's lacking would be what I would call logical expertise. Logical expertise would be, it's not so much about knowing how to code, but it's having an idea that is often expressed in code. Like, for example, if I were going to create some sort of low code, no code thing, and I had the option to create 50 fields, and each of those 50 fields has an individual set of settings on them. That's one way to go. Another way to go would be to come up with a set of standard presets and have all 50 fields use that, or to create some business rule that they can all reference, so I don't have to custom tweak a whole bunch of stuff. This notion of reuse. If I'm putting together a database, I probably want to normalize it. Instead of having a single table with response number 1, response number 2, response number 3, I might want a table of entries and responses and link them together. And that way, if I have just one response, great. If I have 10, that's great, but I don't have to create a bunch of empty space. This notion of just reducing the need to repeat and encapsulating stuff, this is pretty standard logical expertise. It transcends any particular tool set or any language or anything like that. Discipline expertise. This is more like, this is less of an issue in the world of business processes. It actually does show up, but it's not as obvious. It's really obvious in the world of business analytics or business intelligence, or what some people enjoy calling data science these days. It actually, I find it disappointing that most of the people out there talking about BI talk about how to use tools, and none of them really talk about what kind of questions are worth asking for from data. In other words, if I don't understand what kind of metrics make sense, and what kind of data is worth collecting, and what kind of data is worth cleaning or making sure is collected, and knowing different techniques for analyzing it that actually give you genuine insight, as opposed to numbers that look cool and are presented in a slick way, but really don't tell you things that can be turned into action. This would be discipline expertise, the discipline of data analysis, the discipline of statistics and research methodologies. This is a big deal. A lot of people fall short on that. You hand them Power BI and expect miracles to happen, but they don't know what to do with data, and they wind up creating lousy applications. Doesn't have to be that way, but 54% of the time it is. In the world of business process management and automation, how about this? Parallel processing. You might want several things to happen at the same time because you would like to speed it up and not have to wait. Except if you have 3 things happening at the same time, and it turns out one of them is dependent on one of the others, you can either have a crazy synchronization scheme built into your business process, or you could just not make them happen in parallel. And if you're not clear on what that means, it's okay, but you ought to know what that means if you're trying to create a business process solution. Third thing would be method expertise, and this would be understanding the notion of delivering software in cycles, for example, and iterations, windows of work. And if we're halfway through an iteration, we've probably finished coding and we're testing, or building and testing, so to speak. The notion of running things through different stages or rings. In other words, I might have a new release of my solution, and I want a small cadre of people to try it out before I let everybody get it. I'm not going to release it to everybody at once. This is exactly, by the way, how Microsoft releases updates to Microsoft 365. It happens in rings. You might be in an early ring, you might be in a late ring, but they are ever expanding rings of people who receive new stuff. So that would be method expertise. And a lack of expertise can contribute to an unhappy citizen-developed application. The next thing would be a lack of vision. And to take that apart, I would say, look, the easiest way to put this is a short one because it's a pretty straightforward concept. Let's take this apart with personal projects versus deployed projects. A personal project is something you build for yourself. A deployed project is something you're building. You might be the user, but other people are going to use it, and they might be people that you don't even know. Citizen developers typically know their users. They have a certain degree of intuition as to what they want to have happen, and that is great, and it allows us to forgive the fact that they might not have some of the formal training that professional developers have. That's fine. Intuition will actually take you a long way if you've got enough built up experience to have a good sense of what it is you want. Getting someone else to crawl inside your head to figure out what you want, it's not always a happy experience. So I'm actually bullish on the subject of intuition, provided that you are working on something for which your intuition is useful. In other words, a personal project. It could be a small project involving you and your colleagues. What it is not, however, is a project that you build for you and yours, and then you want to give it to me and mine and hope that it works. Personal projects do not scale. There's a certain notion of me-centrism that's probably worth talking about for a minute. A lot of really nice projects actually probably work, those mixed results things. I can't be absolutely certain about this, but I bet a lot of them worked like this. It was great when I built them for me and mine, in other words, my immediate colleagues that I hang out with all the time, but it just didn't scale. Put another way, this is a quote I've heard in different ways by different people, but to sort of paraphrase them all, it was a great solution, but I wish I'd never shared it. Because basically, you build a solution for yourself. You will be forced to spend a finite amount of time on it. Remember, if you're a citizen developer, you're spending time that's either personal time or professional time working on something to make your normal professional life better. You're not going to do everything. You don't have time for it. So you will make choices. You will sacrifice some stuff in order to get the things you really care about. It reflects your priorities. The moment you start involving other people or offering it to other people, their priorities might be different from yours. And if you're eager to please, and you still try to help them, you suddenly become responsible for them. And they demand changes, and they want them now. In fact, they really want them yesterday, and they think you're stupid for not having done it that way the first time. But you effectively become, at that point, IT, and it's not a very happy thing. That can happen a lot. There's also the notion of lack of fit. And how can I best put this? Lack of fit is when the tools don't necessarily fit the task at hand. And I would look at it like this. The goal of most low-code, no-code software is to free you from having to code like a developer. We as an industry have actually gotten pretty good at this. There are a lot of low-code, no-code solutions out there, and a lot of them are good. It's easy to avoid coding like a developer. Pat ourselves on the back for this. But thinking like a developer, well, we are not so good at that. We kind of need to think like developers, even if we don't have to code like them. There is one exception. If you don't want to have to think like a developer, the only solution I've seen that consistently works would be wizards. Wizards that build things automatically or wizards that configure things automatically. Now, wizards are limited in scope. They only do certain things. But if you don't put constraints on something, you can't focus. And make it work. Part of being a developer is to think of many things happening at the same time and the relationships between them. If you can't do that, you can't figure out how software is going to behave. In fact, developers are really good at it. The average person can think of 3 to 5 things simultaneously and how they all fit together. Really, really good developers can do close to 20 if they get in what is called sometimes the zone or the flow. They can think about 20 things and their interdependencies and what happens when you change one of them. It's a valuable skill. It's actually more important than being able to code. It's a thinking skill, and it's quite important. Well, if you can't do that, then someone creates a wizard, asks you a bunch of questions, and builds what you want. You don't have to think like a developer for that. You'll be limited in what's possible because we put a lot of constraints on it. That doesn't have to be a bad thing. But it doesn't free us from thinking like a developer if we want to build any of a number of different things. So, look, if I want you to have a lot of different options, you're still going to need to think like a developer. And not everybody is ready to think like a developer. In fact, a lot of the issues where a citizen development project failed, the person thought they could get away with that without having to think like a developer, and they cut corners and did crazy things. One of the things, this is near and dear to my heart because I am a business process guy. And this is an epiphany that citizen developers and professional developers alike have sometimes. You know your task at hand. You can envision the outcome of that task. Automating tasks is a good thing for most citizen development platforms and tools. But a process is bigger than that. A process is usually much more than any one person's task at hand. A process is usually not something you can automate for yourself, certainly not one you can manage for yourself, because a process is usually made up out of a set of tasks. It will usually exceed one person's skill set. A process involves assets. It involves groups of people. In fact, if you really want to be good at building a process, you need to be a citizen, not in terms of being normal person. I'm talking about a citizen using the old school definition from, say, the founding fathers of the United States, or Rome in its golden age, where a citizen was somebody who was part of the community but felt a certain responsibility to the civilization as a whole. That kind of citizen, big picture type person, contribute to the greater good type of thing. I'll give you an example. This will be a little bit easier. Let's say I want to, if I'm thinking about automating a task, I will probably think of ways, especially if this is a data entry task, to reduce the total amount of data entry I have to do. And if 8 people are all doing the same thing, I might want us to enter as little as possible and let, say this is an expense report type system or a purchase request system. I might, instead of having everybody figure out what the exchange rates are, if we're talking about expenses that are incurred in different countries, why don't I just give that all to accounting and have them figure it out? Why do I have to teach 8 people how to do currency conversions? Why don't I have accounting do that in one place? Well, because the 8 people that are inputting expense reports cost a lot less per hour than the people in accounting. And what I've done is taken the repetitive work and put it in the place where it's less expensive to have happen. Now, exchange rates are not a good example because there are ways to automate that completely. But on the very first iteration of an application, I probably still have people doing that part manually. And it is cheaper to have that happen at the data entry stage as opposed to the data analysis stage. That's a thought a citizen developer would not typically have. Tasks, things like simple approvals or transferring data from one place to another, or application automation. These are all very useful things, But automating a task, an approval is a useful thing. Let's just focus on approvals for a second. An approval is get somebody to say yes or no and move it along. But an approval is basically requesting a single decision. A task might involve, yeah, I want a decision, but I also want you to provide input in a structured way. And I want different kinds of input at the technical, from a technical reviewer compared to a financial reviewer, compared to a security reviewer. And I may want to collect their reactions in different places. In fact, I might want the financial person to provide me in a structured number style way how much she or he thinks it's going to cost. And for the security person to rate the likelihood of several different common risk factors. It's more than just having somebody make a decision and move forward. In fact, each of them could cause the application to move backwards, forwards, sideways, and so on and so forth. So tasks can be simple, but tasks can be very elaborate. And when you put tasks together and string them into processes, well, I might have things like harvesting data in order to make it usable to answer questions in a business scenario, business intelligence scenario, or I may have a customer relationship journey mapped out from the first moment they see an ad to when they hit our website to when they get in touch with somebody to when they actually purchase something. I may have whole sets of approvals or a very ad hoc case-oriented approach to doing collaborative authoring. Processes are bigger things. Citizen development efforts are much more successful with tasks than they are with processes. Another reason why they fail is what I would call, and I only recently started thinking about this, is maybe it's a lack of consistency. And a lack of consistency is not, it's not unique to citizen development, but when you have a scenario with professional developers that all have a common management, they tend to follow certain standards, and that can help reduce this problem. Not deliberately, it's accidental, but it still has the right outcome. If you suddenly allow lots of people to build applications for themselves, each one of those applications might not be bad at all. But when you start having 2 or 5 or 20 or 50 different applications built in 50 different ways by 50 different people, you start getting chaos. And it can drive users crazy. Look, even professional developers have this problem. I can give 2 skilled, talented developers a task of, I need, simple data entry form with a save button. They will build 2, and I don't let them talk to each other, and I don't give them anything. They use their own tools, their own expertise, their own predispositions. I'm going to get 2 different solutions that won't look alike. In fact, there is a very good chance that clicking the save button won't do the same thing between the 2 applications. This is why citizen development, even more than professional development, can fail, because it can make users very unhappy with having to relearn things over and over again and do context switching all the time. They work fine for scratching a local itch, but they don't scale out to more people. In a professional development shop, they probably have common user interface standards. They probably have common libraries that they use and common tools. And that's why, even though I don't think they're necessarily actively trying to make every application similar to each other, it works out that way, and usually with happy results. Now, we've been talking about what happens when it doesn't work. Remember, just under 1 time out of 5, it does work. We kind of like to make that happen more often, wouldn't we? So why don't we take that apart? Because there are some really good stories about when citizen development efforts produced shining, wonderful examples. The Power Platform people have a group of, I think, I'm sorry, I have forgotten what their names are. It's not the 12 apostles, it's 10, and I think they're superheroes or visionaries or something to that effect. One of the ones they bring out a lot is a gentleman who works at London's Heathrow Airport and wound up creating a lot of very, very useful and helpful power apps. He did. It's the absolute truth. It's a shining example of citizen development done right. What happened there? Well, in that case and many others, the citizens transformed. Some citizens became developers. That guy at Heathrow, his job changed. He's not doing his old job anymore. He's building power apps full time. They recognized what he was doing. They thought it was good. They rewarded him for it. There's not a thing wrong with that. In fact, there's so much right about that. It's not funny. It's wonderful. But he's not doing that old job. He's a developer now. And he's learned many, many, many more things along the way. And he's segued in. He's not a coder, but he's absolutely a developer. And we should just recognize that. Also, some developers became citizens. What I mean by this is people with formal development skills sometimes take jobs in lines of business as opposed to central IT. In fact, give you a perfect example. There are very few sales departments that are larger than a certain size that don't have one person who's dedicated to sales operations. They typically manage Microsoft Dynamics CRM, or they manage Salesforce, or they manage whatever, and they do a whole bunch of other things. But if you look at their job, it feels a lot more like application development and application maintenance and management and advocacy and education than it does sales. And that person's skill set, they've learned a lot about the world of selling, and that's what makes them really useful to the sales department. They don't sit in IT, they sit in sales. They're developers, but they became citizens. What's more, again, that classic Roman definition of a citizen, you may have people that just started doing certain kinds of applications and got really into the subject matter. Many years ago, I lived in Washington, D.C. and worked for a lot of trade associations, which did a lot of lobbying, and a lot of them had applications either purchased or built that did a lot of orchestrated lobbying management. It's an interesting topic in some ways, and the more some people got into it, the more they focused on building those kinds of applications and only those kinds of applications. So they became subject matter experts, and that's not a bad thing. So the citizens transformed. You had some people become citizens, and you had some citizens become developers, but the world's better off for it. The next thing that happened is that IT transformed. And this is also a very, very, very good thing. So IT transformed in 3 ways. In places where citizen development worked, IT became coaches. They coached people on how to do development. In other words, they gave them, at least in broad strokes, recommendations on methods for building software and techniques that were extremely useful. They also became curators. And curators in the sense of building repositories of reusable works, so you didn't have to reinvent the wheel every time. And also tools, selecting tools that would help deal with a lot of things that are normally not considered, like maintainability, deployability, self-documentation. Just building the application is just a tiny piece of the overall solution. Some tools help you with the other stuff, and some do not. Finding the right tools and recommending them and teaching people how to use them, that's forward-thinking IT departments do this. They also became participants or partners in the overall citizen development process. And that kind of means the organizations as a whole transformed. So in a transformed organization where citizen development works, IT is no longer perceived as the enemy. It's not the department of no. maybe sometimes when people are doing horrible things security-wise, I suppose, but a savvy IT department, especially in Europe with GDPR and so on, will spin around and say, look, it's not us, it's the government. I'm trying to help you guys, not get arrested. So we're not the Department of No, we're the Department of keep you out of trouble. And if someone actually gets that, well, you've got a transformed organization. Stakeholders are perceived by IT to not be a nuisance. And when they ask for changes, that's not something that produces an eye roll, that produces thought and action. And in a transformed organization, IT doesn't hold the budget, the line of business does, which means the people that want something know that they have to pay for it, and therefore they realize that they have to establish priorities and set trade-offs. And those trade-offs are shared between lines of business and IT. Last thing, and this is actually the most important part to me, citizen development done poorly produces what is sometimes referred to as shadow IT. People lurking in the dark corners of the organization doing things that IT used to do without IT's knowledge, operating in the shadows. In satellite IT, they're distributed. They're not down on the ground. They're out in the hinterlands. But they're actually communicating with IT and part of an overall distributed virtual organization. They aren't bypassing IT, they're working with IT. They're not going to change their location. They're answering first and foremost to their line of business organizations. In fact, they're doing what I like to call, and this is a term I'm coining, citizen-assisted development, where you have professionals and citizens working together in order to achieve better results. And in assisted development, you have people with professional skills, at least professional people that are happy to think like developers, but they're not going to spend time coding like one because it takes too long, that are immersed in the environments of the people that they have to help. Either they came up from there and are promoted into doing or transformed into doing development work in the trenches, or they've plopped down into that environment and they like it and they stay. There's a notion of clarity and transparency. In other words, if I build something for you and I can't explain it to you, then I failed. There's nothing I shouldn't build for you that I can't explain how it works and that I can't get feedback from you on. And I should be able to react to it really, really quickly. This is extremely important. So citizen-assisted developers, not development, but developers, they aren't coders, but they are developers. They sit in lines of business, not IT. The agenda is set by the line of business, and there's frequent communication all the time. Now, how can IT help with satellite development? I would say that coming up with tool usage standards where useful consistency constraints exist and packaging deployment is always considered, and change management. These are usually the areas where a lot of low-code, no-code tools fall apart. It's not in the building of the solution, it's in the deployment and orchestration and management of it that it usually falls apart, and the ability to embrace change. If you don't have tools that allow you to make relatively frequent changes that don't disrupt everything and certainly don't destroy anything, you might not be using the right tools. So IT can help with that. IT can build libraries for satellite developers to use and put forth best practices that are responsive to citizen needs and are responsible to them.
Mike?
Yes.
Apologize to interrupt you.
I've got 1 minute, so time to close, right?
Yeah, you have 5 more minutes with the Q&A, so feel free to mention wrapping up. I just want to do a time check with you.
Of course. All right,
Thank
so
you.
Let's wrap this up. In closing, this is not easy. If you want to move from being less than 20% successful to more than that, you need to do some organizational changes. Technology is not going to save you. Adopting Power Apps and Flow, adopting Webcon BPS, adopting anybody's technology is not going to create. The tech won't create miracles. Change is about people. What you need to carefully consider are whom should be building applications in your organization, what they should be working on. Because I do still believe in citizen development and think if if you're scratching a local itch, let people do that and don't get in their way. It's when that goes beyond just me scratching my itch that citizen-assisted development comes into play. And how can we support them? Because if we don't support them, they do crazy things in the shadows. Maybe we should redefine some terms. What we call a citizen developer today kind of implies an amateur developer. I actually think it should be a personal productivity developer. That's a better term because I want to use the term citizen and redefine it. I don't want it to mean a non-IT user. If you're a citizen, you care about the organization as a whole. You are a steward of the organization. Citizen development ought to mean citizen-focused, citizen-involved application building, not just, non-IT users building stuff for themselves in a corner. And as much development as possible ought to be citizen-assisted. So, with that, you guys ready for a raffle? Because we're giving away 3 Oculus Quest devices. All in one. Go to bit.ly M365 raffle. Seriously, click on that link and go nuts. Visit the vendor's booth, attend sessions, watch the videos, submit your answers to enter the raffle. You need at least 5 correct answers and then submit for a chance to win one of these 3. We'll do one in the Americas, one in APAC, and one in EMEA. Also, 10% of the funds from sponsors are going to support community relief. For more information, check out info@m365virtualmarathon.com. And you might want to consider, we encourage it, donating to the following charity relief funds: the United Way, give.uwkc.org, M365VM. Also, the International Medical Corps, that would be bit.ly/Medical Corps Fund. Thank you very much for joining us. If you want to get in touch with me, MikeFitz@MikeFitz.com, or direct message me on Twitter @MikeFitz, or come see me at LinkedIn, linkedin.com/in/Mike Fitzmaurice. Scan those links or click on those URLs in order to submit feedback for the event as a whole or just on me. And now, are there any questions?